In the pre-dawn darkness of May 11, 1945, on a remote Philippine hillside near Dingalan Bay, a 23-year-old private from Georgia faced a nightmare that should have killed him in seconds. Outnumbered more than 40-1, bleeding from a severed ear, armed only with a rifle and raw desperation, John R. McKinney fought the most savage close-quarters battle any American soldier would survive in the Pacific Theater. What happened in the next 36 minutes defies rational explanation, yet every detail has been verified, every body counted, every witness interrogated. Before we begin this story, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, to stay with us until the very end, and to write in the comments below which city, state, or country you are watching from. This is not a legend. This is not Hollywood fiction. This is the documented truth of one man who became a storm of violence when annihilation seemed certain. The jungle night on Luzon had been oppressive, thick with the wet heat that made sleep almost impossible even for exhausted men. Private John McKinney had collapsed into his tent sometime after midnight, his body aching from weeks of patrol and skirmish in the mountainous terrain east of Manila. The campaign to liberate the Philippines had ground on for months, brutal and unrelenting, and McKinney's unit had pushed deep into territory where Japanese forces still operated with desperate ferocity. The war in Europe had ended just days before. Germany had surrendered. But here, 10,000 miles from Berlin, the killing continued with an intensity that suggested it might never stop. McKinney came from people who understood hardship in their bones. He had been raised in the red clay country of Georgia, the son of sharecroppers who worked land they would never own, who survived seasons of drought and flood with the kind of silent endurance that left no room for complaint. His childhood had been one of labor and scarcity, rising before dawn to work fields, hunting in the pine forests when there was time, learning to shoot because ammunition was precious and every shot had to count. He had grown lean and hard, his hands calloused, his eyes accustomed to tracking movement through dense brush. The rifle had been a tool of survival long before it became a weapon of war, and he had developed the kind of marksmanship that came not from formal training but from necessity, from knowing that a missed shot meant his family went hungry. When the war came, McKinney had enlisted without fanfare, without speeches about patriotism or glory. He went because men from his county went, because the world was burning and his country had called. The Army had recognized his skills quickly. In training, instructors noted his exceptional accuracy, his ability to remain calm under pressure, his understanding of terrain and concealment. But nothing in Georgia, nothing in the training camps of the American South, could have prepared him for the war he found in the Pacific. The jungle was a living entity that tried to kill you in 1,000 ways. It rotted your boots, bred infections in the smallest scratch, concealed enemies who had spent years mastering its rhythms. The heat was paralyzing, the insects maddening, the terrain treacherous. McKinney had learned quickly, adapting the hunting skills of his youth to this alien environment. He moved quietly, observed carefully, trusted his instincts. He had killed men before this night, in firefights and ambushes, but always as part of a unit, always with others beside him. He had seen friends die, had dragged wounded comrades to cover, had learned that survival in combat was part skill, part luck, and part something darker that he could not name. On the night of May 10, intelligence had reported Japanese forces in the area, but the reports had been vague, unreliable. Enemy units were scattered throughout the highlands, some large, some merely fragments of destroyed battalions, all dangerous, all willing to die. McKinney's company had established a defensive perimeter on high ground, with machine gun positions covering the likely approaches. Standard procedure. Sentries posted. A night like dozens of others. McKinney had cleaned his rifle, checked his ammunition, and tried to sleep despite the heat and the distant sounds of the jungle. He woke to the sensation of movement and pain, a flash of steel and the hot rush of blood down the side of his neck. A Japanese sergeant had slashed through the tent canvas in the darkness, the blade cutting deep, partially severing McKinney's right ear in a strike meant to decapitate him. The pain was instant and shocking, but McKinney's reaction was faster than conscious thought. His hand found his rifle in the blackness, and he drove the weapon upward, not firing but using it as a club, smashing the stock into the shape above him. The sergeant stumbled, and McKinney rolled, bringing the rifle around, firing point-blank into the man's torso. The muzzle flash illuminated the tent for a fraction of a second, revealing the contorted face of his attacker before the darkness returned. McKinney scrambled out of the tent into chaos. The entire perimeter was under assault. Shapes moved through the pre-dawn gloom, muzzle flashes sparked like fireflies. Men were shouting in English and Japanese, the sounds overlapping into a cacophony of violence. The attack had come with the kind of coordination that spoke of planning and desperation, a final push by enemy forces who knew they were surrounded, who had chosen to die fighting rather than surrender or starve. McKinney could see the machine gun position, the place where his unit's heaviest weapon had been emplaced to cover the eastern approach, and he saw that it had been overrun. Bodies lay scattered around the sandbags, some American, some Japanese, and more enemy soldiers were pouring through the gap they had created. He did not think. There was no time for thought. McKinney ran toward the machine gun position, firing as he moved, working the bolt of his rifle with mechanical precision. His first shot dropped a Japanese soldier climbing over the sandbags. His second caught another in the chest. He fired again and again, closing the distance, each shot deliberate despite the speed. 10 enemy soldiers had taken the position, some still fighting with American defenders, others turning their weapons outward to cover their advance. McKinney killed them methodically, his Georgia marksmanship ruthlessly efficient. A soldier turned toward him, and McKinney shot him through the throat. Another raised a rifle and died before he could aim. McKinney vaulted the sandbags and landed among the bodies, his boots slipping on blood-soaked earth. The machine gun was silent, its barrel shattered by a grenade blast, the ammunition belt severed. The weapon was useless. McKinney grabbed what grenades he could find from the fallen Americans, stuffing them into his pockets, and then he was moving again because staying still meant death. More Japanese soldiers were advancing up the hillside, a wave of them emerging from the jungle below, and McKinney realized with sickening clarity that he was alone. The main American position was behind him, under attack from another direction, and no one was coming to help. He positioned himself behind a fallen log, using the meager cover to steady his aim, and began to fire into the advancing enemy. The light was growing, dawn breaking over the mountains, and he could see them now, dozens of men in their tattered uniforms, moving uphill with the determination of those who had nothing left to lose. McKinney fired until his rifle was empty, reloaded, fired again. He counted his shots, rationed his ammunition with the discipline of a man who had learned never to waste a bullet. Each shot was aimed, each one mattered. Men fell, but more kept coming. A mortar round exploded 30 yards to his left, showering him with dirt and shrapnel. He felt something hot slice across his shoulder but ignored it. Another round landed closer, the concussion lifting him off his feet and slamming him against the log. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but his hands kept working, reloading, aiming, firing. The Japanese were trying to suppress him with indirect fire, but their mortars were inaccurate in the broken terrain, and McKinney kept moving, never staying in one place long enough for them to adjust their aim. He killed a soldier at 40 yards, then another at 30. A group of 3 tried to flank him from the right, and he caught them in the open, dropping all three in rapid succession. His rifle was hot, the barrel burning his hand when he touched it to check for damage. He had fired more rounds in these few minutes than in some entire engagements, and his ammunition was running low. McKinney crawled to the nearest Japanese body and searched it, finding clips of ammunition that fit his rifle. The irony was not lost on him, using the enemy's own supplies to kill them, but survival had no room for sentiment. The mortars stopped, and McKinney knew what that meant. They were coming again, a direct assault, and this time they would not stop until they overwhelmed him or died trying. He could see them gathering below, perhaps 20 men, maybe more, and he knew his ammunition would not last. He had perhaps 30 rounds left, and there were too many targets. He would have to let them close, would have to make every shot perfect, and even then the mathematics of the situation were brutal. They charged up the slope, screaming, some firing as they ran, others holding their fire to conserve ammunition for close combat. McKinney waited, forcing himself to remain calm, to breathe, to let them come into the range where he could not miss. When the first soldier was 20 yards away, he fired. The man dropped. He fired again, and another fell. The rifle kicked against his shoulder, the familiar recoil grounding him in the mechanical reality of marksmanship. He worked the bolt, acquired a target, fired. Worked the bolt, fired. The advancing line wavered as men stumbled and died, but the survivors kept coming, and then they were too close for aimed fire. McKinney grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, threw it into the mass of soldiers. The explosion tore through them, bodies flying, and in the momentary confusion he shot 2 more. His rifle clicked empty. He dropped it, pulled his pistol, fired into the face of a man 3 feet away. The soldier fell backward, and McKinney shot another, then another. The pistol emptied. A Japanese soldier lunged at him with a bayonet, and McKinney caught the rifle, twisted it, drove his knee into the man's ribs and wrenched the weapon away. He reversed it and bayoneted the soldier with his own weapon, then turned and shot another with the captured rifle. The violence was intimate and terrible. There was no distance, no abstraction. McKinney could see the faces of the men he killed, could smell their sweat and blood, could hear their final breaths. He fought with a ferocity born of absolute necessity, every movement a choice between killing and dying. A soldier came at him with a sword, the blade whistling through the air, and McKinney blocked it with the rifle, the impact jarring his arms. He stepped inside the next swing and drove the rifle butt into the man's face, shattering bone, then shot him as he fell. The ground around him was carpeted with bodies. Japanese and American dead lay intermingled, some still moving, groaning, dying slowly. McKinney had lost track of time, had no sense of how long he had been fighting. His hands were slick with blood, his uniform soaked with it, some his, most not. His ear throbbed where it had been cut, blood crusting on his neck and shoulder. He was exhausted, his arms leaden, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he could not stop, would not stop. More soldiers appeared, these ones carrying a mortar tube and shells, setting up position to fire directly at his location. McKinney saw them through the trees, perhaps 60 yards distant, and knew he had to stop them before they could range in on him. He found his rifle, reloaded it with the last of his ammunition, and moved toward them, using the terrain for cover. The mortar crew was focused on their weapon, adjusting elevation, preparing to fire. McKinney shot the gunner first, then the loader, then the third man who tried to flee. He reached the mortar position and destroyed the weapon, bending the tube until it was useless, then took their ammunition and grenades. He heard voices calling in Japanese, more soldiers coordinating, trying to surround him. McKinney moved again, climbing higher up the slope, finding a position among the rocks where he could see the approaches. His body was failing, muscles cramping, hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. He forced himself to drink from his canteen, the water warm and metallic, and tried to assess his situation. He had killed more men than he could count, had stopped multiple assaults, but they kept coming. How many were left? 10, 20. He did not know. He only knew that he would keep fighting until they were all dead or he was. The next assault came from two directions, a coordinated attack that spoke of better leadership. McKinney threw his grenades first, targeting the larger group, the explosions buying him seconds. He fired at the smaller group, dropping 3 men before they could find cover. The survivors went to ground and a firefight developed, shots crackling back and forth through the jungle. McKinney aimed carefully, watching for movement, firing when he had a clear target. A soldier exposed himself to throw a grenade, and McKinney shot him before he could release it. The grenade detonated among the Japanese position, screams following the blast. He was down to his last few rounds again, scrounging ammunition from bodies, operating on instinct and training that had been beaten into him through months of combat. His mind had entered a state beyond fear, beyond conscious decision. He moved, aimed, fired, moved again. The pattern repeated endlessly, each iteration bringing him closer to the moment when his ammunition would run out and the fighting would become purely physical. He had his bayonet, his knife, his hands. He would use them all. 2 soldiers rushed his position simultaneously, and McKinney shot one, missed the second, threw himself sideways as the man fired. The bullet passed so close he felt its heat. He rolled, came up with his knife, and buried it in the soldier's stomach, twisting, pulling it free as the man collapsed. He retrieved his rifle, checked the chamber, found 1 round left. He looked down the slope and saw 3 more soldiers advancing cautiously, and he knew this was likely his last stand. He aimed at the lead soldier and fired. The man went down. McKinney reloaded with a clip taken from a body beside him, hands moving automatically. He fired at the second soldier, missed, fired again and hit. The third soldier dove behind a tree, and McKinney waited, watching, patient despite the chaos. The soldier leaned out to fire, and McKinney shot him through the head. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the jungle was quiet. No more shots, no more screams, no movement except the wind in the trees and the settling of disturbed earth. McKinney remained in position, rifle ready, scanning for targets, waiting for the next wave. His heart hammered in his chest, his breath harsh and labored. Blood dripped from his ear, from cuts he had not noticed receiving. His entire body trembled with exhaustion. Minutes passed. 5, 10. No attack came. In the growing daylight, McKinney could see the full scope of what had happened. Bodies lay scattered across the hillside, Japanese soldiers in twisted, broken poses. He counted them mechanically, moving from position to position, ensuring each was dead, collecting ammunition and grenades out of habit. 10 bodies around the machine gun position. 15 more on the slope below. 8 near the mortar position. More scattered through the trees. 40 men. 40 enemy soldiers dead. And he had killed them all in just over half an hour of sustained, brutal combat. He heard voices calling his name in English, American voices, and he nearly shot at them before recognition penetrated his combat-shocked brain. His own unit was advancing. Men from his company who had fought off their own attacks and now came to reinforce what they assumed was a massacre of their positions. They found McKinney standing alone among the dead, covered in blood, his rifle held loosely in hands that would not stop shaking. The men who arrived that morning would later testify to what they saw, would provide sworn statements for the official investigation. They counted the bodies. They examined the positions. They interviewed McKinney, who could barely speak, whose voice was raw from shouting and breathing gunsmoke. The evidence was overwhelming and incontrovertible. One man, acting alone, had stopped an entire Japanese assault force through a combination of marksmanship, tactical skill, and sheer refusal to die. Lieutenant William Belcher, McKinney's platoon leader, recommended him for the Medal of Honor immediately. The recommendation moved through channels with unusual speed, the eyewitness testimony and physical evidence so compelling that there was no doubt about the legitimacy of the claim. In an army that had seen countless acts of valor, McKinney's stand was recognized as something extraordinary, a display of combat effectiveness that military analysts would study for decades. The wound to his ear required medical attention, stitches that left a permanent scar. McKinney was treated for exhaustion, dehydration, and multiple minor shrapnel wounds. Psychologically, the effects would take longer to manifest. He did not sleep well for weeks, startled awake by sounds and shadows, reliving those 36 minutes in dreams that felt more real than memory. But he returned to duty, finished the campaign, and was present when Japan surrendered in August. On January 23, 1946, in a ceremony at the White House, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around John McKinney's neck. The citation recounted the action in clinical military language, but Truman, who had served in the trenches of the First World War, understood what the words meant. He shook McKinney's hand and told him that his country was grateful. McKinney accepted the medal with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his service, uncomfortable with the attention, embarrassed by the praise. He returned to Georgia, to the red clay country and the people who had shaped him. He did not speak of the war unless asked directly, and even then his answers were brief and factual. He worked, married, raised a family, lived the kind of unremarkable civilian life that thousands of veterans sought after the trauma of combat. The Medal of Honor sat in a drawer, shown occasionally to his children, but not displayed, not celebrated. McKinney had done what he believed any soldier would have done in his position, had survived when survival seemed impossible, and had no desire to be treated as a hero. The years passed. The Korean War came and went, then Vietnam, then others. The Second World War receded into history, its veterans aging, their numbers declining. McKinney grew old quietly, his memories intact but private, the psychological scars of that May morning never fully healing. He died in 1997 at the age of 75 and was buried with military honors. For decades, his story remained known primarily to military historians and students of the Pacific Campaign. But in the 2010s, as researchers began compiling comprehensive records of Medal of Honor recipients, McKinney's action received renewed attention. The sheer statistical improbability of what he had accomplished, the detailed documentation, and the testimony of witnesses combined to create a portrait of one of the most extraordinary individual combat actions in American military history. In 2017, a section of highway in Georgia was dedicated in his honor, a small recognition for a man who had asked for none. The battlefield near Dingalan Bay is jungle again now, the scars of war overgrown, the positions where men fought and died reclaimed by the forest. No markers indicate where McKinney made his stand, where 40 soldiers died in 36 minutes of apocalyptic violence. The Philippine earth has absorbed the blood and the memory, leaving only the official records and the fading recollections of those who knew him. What drives a man to fight when reason says he should die? What combination of training, instinct, and will allows one individual to defeat overwhelming odds? Military psychologists have studied McKinney's action, analyzing the decisions he made, the tactics he employed, the mental state that allowed him to function under unimaginable stress. The consensus is that he operated in a state of hyperfocus, his conscious mind subsumed by training and survival instinct, his body executing patterns learned through repetition until they became automatic. But this analysis, clinical and detached, cannot fully capture the reality of those minutes, the terror and the fury, the absolute commitment to continued existence. McKinney never claimed to be brave. He insisted when asked that he had simply done what was necessary, that any other soldier would have done the same. This was the humility of his generation, men who had endured the Depression and won the war, and then built the post-war world without expecting gratitude or recognition. But the record is clear. Not every soldier could have done what McKinney did. Not every soldier would have survived. He possessed some combination of skill and temperament that proved decisive in a moment when history balanced on the edge of a blade. The men he killed that morning were also sons and brothers, also products of their culture and their time, also fighting for what they believed was right. War reduces complexity to brutal simplicity. Kill or be killed. McKinney understood this with the clarity of someone who had grown up with scarcity and hardship, who knew that survival was never guaranteed, who had learned to take the shot because there might not be another chance. The Japanese soldiers who attacked that morning were brave in their own right, willing to die in a cause they knew was lost, fighting with the ferocity of desperation. They were not monsters. They were men. And they died because one sharecropper's son from Georgia refused to join them. This is the story we must remember, not because war is glorious, but because forgetting dishonors those who endured it. John McKinney did not want to fight. He did not seek violence or glory. But when violence found him, when annihilation seemed certain, he fought with every skill and instinct he possessed, and he survived. His story is one of thousands from that war, most never recorded, most lost to time and failing memory. But this one was documented, verified, honored, and it stands as testament to what human beings are capable of when pushed to the absolute limit of endurance. So I ask you now, as this story concludes, to subscribe to this channel if you found value in this account, to like this video if it moved you, and to share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us where you are watching from, which city, which state, which country. Tell us if you knew this story, or if, like so many acts of valor, it had been forgotten until now. The men and women who fought in the wars of the past century deserve our remembrance, not for the violence they inflicted or endured, but for the humanity they maintained despite it, for the lives they built afterward, for the quiet dignity with which they carried their scars. John McKinney was one of them. May we never forget his 36 minutes, and may we never need to ask such sacrifices of our sons and daughters again.